Haunted hiking trails, creepy old graveyards, abandoned ghost towns, and old buildings where spirits lurk. Come and explore some of these most haunted places where people just like you and me come face to face with ghosts. This is folklorist and author Jeanette Quackenbush with Backroads Books by 21 Crows. I discover and research old ghost stories, folklore, and legends, then pass them on to you. I have found a whole bunch of these haunted locations of legends and folklore. Now let me help you find your scary place, where our natural world and their supernatural world collide. There is an old cabin tucked deep in the woods of Shenandoah National Park, nearly 1.5 miles down a narrow, steep trail beneath a canopy of mature trees and across a bubbling river. It rests there, with an occasional rattlesnake sunning itself on a boulder a few steps away. And once in a while, a deer, bear, or raccoon ambles past, doing what wild animals do in the wild, foraging for food or searching for a mate or a place to rest their heads. It is the George Corbin Cabin, and I stayed there a few weeks ago. It was a dry autumn when I backpacked in, and the Hughes River I had to cross was hardly running. The spring was dried up, and the air was about 70 degrees during the day. However, the weather took a turn soon enough. It dipped down to 20 to 30 degrees at night. It was as if Mother Nature suddenly realized that it was time to escort the seemingly long, carefree autumn out to allow the angrier winter to stomp its way in. The wind kicked up in the hollow in the dark evening air, knocking and banging the trees outside and making moaning noises sweep up through the forest. I did not light a fire. I just hunkered down in the kitchen in my sleeping bag. It was quiet in the cabin until I was gently goaded from sleep by occasional deep coughing. Once, footsteps resounded in the other room as if someone was quietly going about some task. I did not rise on either occasion. I knew the cabin was haunted by those who had previously lived within its walls. That night, they were quiet. Oh, but it was not that way the first time I visited the cabin. Nope, not at all. But it makes sense because then I was an unexpected guest. And folks, regardless of whether they are alive or dead, do not always take to strangers dropping in uninvited, building a fire in their kitchen stove, eating at their table, and camping out on their floor. So let me tell you my ghost story about me barging into Mr. George Corbin's home without as much as a knock on the door. Nobody quietly tiptoed around the stranger so as not to awaken her that time. Instead, I was greeted more appropriately by a family a bit annoyed at the uninvited guest. Stony Man is the second highest mountain in Shenandoah National Park, and the Hughes River flows from its slopes, downward and deep, to a valley called Nicholson Hollow, now a lush and remote forest. However, it was not always secluded. This hollow was home to a community of homesteaders who lived by farming, grazing, apple growing, and distilling. George Corbin resided there, a mountain farmer who built a cabin when he was 21 years old, by the Hughes River. It was close to his father's home. George's place was 2 stories with a single living room downstairs and a single upstairs room, and the perfect place to live, love, and raise a family. George would live most of his life in the hollow. He married 3 times. His first wife, Mildred, died before he built the cabin, and his second wife, Bertie, passed away in the home in February of 1924, only a few hours after the birth of their 3rd child. As years passed, George added a kitchen and other areas to his cabin. He married Eula Nicholson. Then in the 1930s, the Corbin family was forced to vacate as the land was going to be a part of the Shenandoah National Park. The cabin is one of the few that somehow survived the demolition of many homesteads in the park. Now the volunteer group Potomac Appalachian Club maintains and rents the Corbin Cabin as one of 43 cabins, so folks can get a taste of history, enjoy the outdoors, and experience what it was like to live in the mountains in earlier years. I had heard the old cabin was haunted, but the stories were vague. Some believe it is George's dead wife Bertie, who now comes back and makes a racket when folks visit. It was a cold winter's day when she passed after giving birth to their child. The doctor had come to check on the new mother and driven to the closest road. George had waited for him at the path to his home with his horse and brought the man down. All seemed fine with the birth, but when George returned from taking the doctor to his vehicle, he found his wife lifeless. He buried her in the frozen ground of the cemetery near the house, then walked 4 hours to Nethers to get the baby milk. Is it she who makes a ghostly presence? Or is it the groans of an old home making noises, the bangs of a nosy wild animal bumping around the building, or the babbling river chattering? I decided I wanted to find out, and the first time I visited, I went in mid-November to see if I heard or saw anything. Those who know me understand I am not a ghost hunter who goes out antagonizing ghosts with rude confrontations and loads of newfangled equipment. I like the folklore, the stories, and sitting back and letting spirits come to me if they wish. And occasionally they do. Often I have found that this approach and just a camera make for more encounters. However, I will admit that fiddling with all the scientific equipment is fun. Regardless, I do not know why I picked that time of the year. I do not particularly like camping or renting a non-electric cabin in the winter. The only heat available at Corbin Cabin is a potbelly stove that needs to be fed wood all night and barely warms a small kitchen area. But after a long drive, with backpack tossed over my shoulders, hand warmers tucked into my pocket, and a flashlight in my hand, I headed out. Getting to Corbin Cabin from the parking area is along the same rugged trail that early homesteaders busted through the mountain, so it is narrow, rocky, and wild, and straight down on the way to the cabin, and narrow and straight on the way back up. And at the end of the trail, hikers must cross the modest Hughes River by a series of stepping stones before they can get to the cabin. In the dark, I fumbled around on the trail, traversed the water without incident, and even saw a bear before it saw me and ran off into the forest. Once inside, I set my flashlight down on the floor and laid out my sleeping bag on a couple of blankets right in front of the stove. To set the mood for the cabin, I played some old bluegrass songs while I got warm. Finally, I went to bed about 9 or 10 in the night, silent and dark air. There were no lights but the meager fire, and just as I laid down, I saw a shadow, like a man, leaning against the doorway between the two rooms, and a voice said quite clearly,
"Dee, we got company."
I shot up, thinking for a half second that I'd gone to the wrong cabin, then quickly remembered I had a key that unlocked it. I was not scared, just startled. I lay there for a while, stoked the fire, and fell deep asleep. And by the way, I was not sure who Dee was when I heard the voice, but it was clearly that name. Sometime during the night, I was awakened by
Meow.
I worked my way up on my elbow, thinking I had dreamed of hearing the voice. I noticed the fire was out, and it was chilly, so I added some more wood. There was a lot of banging going on outside, which I figured was a bear. I was just too large for raccoons, so I laid back down and enjoyed the bumps and bangs of the woods until I fell asleep. Again, I was awakened by a chill in the air, and
Meow.
I opened my eyes, looked around, and realized I must have fallen asleep for a couple of hours because the fire was out again. I stoked it up and tried to fall back to sleep. Now, it was really cold out that night and dark. I walked to the outhouse outside with my cell phone light blazing and did not see anything amiss. I returned and was fully awake from the brisk walk. And as I lay there, it sounded like 3 or 4 people were trekking past the cabin. I looked at the time and it was about 2 in the morning. Now, honestly, I thought it was odd that someone was hiking this late in the dark on a 4 to 5 mile loop, but I listened to their chatter for the longest time, and then it faded away. Needless to say, so the night progressed as such. Each time the fire went out, I was awakened by that
Meow.
I would estimate it was 4 to 6 times that deep voice awakened me. Had the voice not roused me in the 15-degree night, I would have been darn frozen when I awakened in the morning, if I did at all. But it did, and I stayed cozy and warm all night. I assume Mr. Corbin haunts the home, and I appreciated his gesture in not allowing me to freeze to death that night, because I think I would have. Those who knew George Corbin said he was a pleasant and friendly man. I think that perhaps he was caring too, and I am glad he and his family were kind enough to share his old homestead with me, this stranger who made herself comfortable within without an invitation from them on more than one occasion. If you're in here, can you make a sound? I know you're in here, Harvey.
HB.